21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
I've already done 4 startups and I did not intend to go do a 5th. But I stumbled upon an AI idea that was so non-intuitive, but was able to prove it out that I really had to go start a company around this because I saw an opportunity to build something that other people weren't looking at that I was convinced was the future of AI. I'm Rob May. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Neurometric. We are an AI company that helps other companies move from one AI model to systems of AI models. And we do that because systems of models typically perform much better across every imaginable variable. They're more accurate, they're faster to run, they're cheaper to run. So I don't think that's something that's obvious to everybody in the AI space. But if you look at other areas of technology, it's very similar. And so, we have a series of tools that help walk people through that. I've been focused on the AI space since 2015. My first company exited in December of 2014. And, I was 38 years old. So I looked around and was like, what am I going to do next? And I looked at all the spaces you would look at. I read the blockchain papers. I bought some Bitcoin. I looked into that space. I looked at corporate messaging. Slack was relatively new, and I think in 2015. And I looked at AI, and I ultimately decided that the next phase of my career would be focused entirely on AI. And so I started doing some angel investing in that space. Started an early customer support chatbot company in that space, which is my second startup. And have been focused on AI ever since. And it's been a really, really interesting ride because even, 10 years later, I feel like we are still just at the beginning of where all this is going to go. I chose those areas to look into for a couple of different reasons, and I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. Bitcoin was new. I think most people know Bitcoin, and it's built on a technology called blockchain. And the thing that's unique about blockchain is it's sort of like a database, but that is shared and used between multiple people and can only be written and not deleted. So it's interesting technology, but I ultimately didn't see a lot of use cases for it outside of cryptocurrency, and it's part of the reason I didn't pursue that space at that time. I actually went down the corporate messaging path before we built our customer support chat bot. The original idea was we had seen Slack and we had seen, obviously used email for a long time. And I had a friend, we had this idea that you could, it's like, well, what if you could make email more effective by giving some context when you send the email of what it might be about? So for example, if I'm emailing you, do I need your input on something, or is this just FYI, or is this am I assigning you a task, like all this kind of stuff? So we built this great prototype. When we tested it in the real world, what we ran into is the context changes as the thread grows. So sometimes it was really simple, and then you could prioritize your email inbox by like, what are my to-dos that other people have assigned me? What needs my replies, etc. What happened was I would send an email that said, hey, I need your reply. I've copied these 3 people, just FYI. And then one of them would respond and go, one of the FYIs, and say, well, I need your feedback on it. And so it just got too messy. So we shut it down. We decided to go in a different direction. So the idea behind the customer support chatbot at the time was, if you look at the history of AI, there was a big test that happened every year on machine vision. And for years and years and years, we worked for 60 years on machine vision, and we were like 78% accurate on identifying things. And then in 2012, this model called AlexNet, which was one of the first deep neural networks trained on GPUs, came out of the woodwork and blew the doors off everybody else and won by like 8 or 10 points, won this like ImageNet competition. And so that was in 2012. So here it was like 2016, I was starting a new company, and I thought, oh, natural language is the next area that's going to go through this kind of change from neural networks. The thesis was correct. We were a couple years too early. But basically the idea was, you were seeing all these chatbots on websites, but they kind of had to be scripted. You kind of had to say, if somebody says this, you respond with this. And we just thought, my business partner and I were like, well, we should be able to just ingest your support documentation, excuse me, and then answer the questions. And the thing we were wrong about, I mean, that is where the world went, but we thought it was a data labeling problem and it was a amount of data problem. So we just didn't have enough data to make that work. And we just thought the data wasn't labeled well enough for what things stood for and that the machine couldn't make sense of it. So we ultimately sold that company a little bit early. It did get acquired, but it was the technology was a little too early to really benefit from, compared to if we had started it 4 or 5 years later. This was all pre-LLM. On my startup journey, the next company that I founded after Tala was acquired, well, I had a brief stint there. I went and became a partner at a VC firm for a couple of years. And the reason that that didn't work out, I think there's a lot of value in being a VC if you've been an entrepreneur because you've seen how the movies play out. You have a lot of empathy for founders. But some of the challenges you have are like part of the reason I am a sort of like control-oriented founder. It's part of the reason I find companies that I like to be able to define where we go and what we do. And even though entrepreneurship is super stressful, particularly in the early days or when you go through those existential crises of like, wow, are we even going to be around in 2 months? Those are pretty terrible. And VC doesn't have those as much because, your funds are on longer cycles. You do have VC funds that don't raise new funds and everything else. But in general, you raise a fund and you have a decade to figure out, to invest it and harvest it and everything. And you have a whole bunch of bets. And so if one company's not doing well, it's like, well, hopefully one is doing really well. So it was a lot of fun. It was very intellectually stimulating. But at the end of the day, I missed kind of like the battleground of being out there and, trying to figure out how to win a customer, how to win a deal against somebody else, how to adopt new technology, how to figure out, what's coming next in the world. GPT-3 had come out, which was the first, I think the first AI model around language that really made people impressed. Now, it ended up becoming the model behind ChatGPT, but ChatGPT hadn't been launched yet. So I was playing around with GPT-3 and like writing a little bit of code. And I thought, oh, you know what you could use this for? I could use this to go create advertisements automatically for products. So, so what you could do is like, I got them drinking this bottled water here. I could say, hey, I'm trying to sell bottled water to people. What I could do is I could have the tool automatically write 2,000 different ads for me. Because why do you buy this bottle of water? Well, convenience, taste, you love water, you support the causes that it has, it's cheap, like, whatever. There's a million different reasons that people make that decision. You could test all those iterations. You could have the machine write them. You could have them target different people. I could say, I could tell the machine, I could prompt it and say, how would you rewrite this if you were going to sell this in Florida versus you were going to sell it in Maine versus you were going to sell it in London or whatever it may be. And the model can generate very quickly. I mean, you could do that with humans, but if you wanted to write 1,000 variations with humans, it would take forever, but the model could do it in a matter of minutes. So I took this idea and we started to build a product around it. And then I realized this could be really hard to sell. I mean, this is 2021. It was really hard to walk into a CMO's office pre-ChatGPT and say, I'm going to sell you a tool that's going to create thousands of different ads using AI and it's just going to run. And they would be like, over my dead body, you're going to auto generate ads and just, throw them out there. So they didn't want that to happen. So I realized like we should just do this ourselves. So we started a company called Dianthus that acquired other e-com companies. And we ran our e-commerce stack. We ran our AI stack on those e-commerce companies to improve the bottom lines. That company did really, really well. The AI worked really well. The revenue grew really well. And then we had taken on a lot of debt for these acquisitions. And when the market had a downturn, the debt became a problem for us and we got into some financial trouble. So that company was sort of my only one that ended up totally worthless, even though it was probably one of the furthest along in revenue for that reason. And Yeah, and so then it sort of brings me to today. The company that I run, Neurometric, also was not started for the idea that we're running on now, and the idea that's taken hold and driven the company was not the original idea. The original idea had to do with new types of AI hardware and how to manage those. So what a lot of people don't know is that historically, there's lots of different ways to perform computation, but most of what we do throughout the entire world for the last 70 years is what they call a von Neumann architecture. And it means memory and computer separate. Data that you're stored in memory comes into the compute, runs a computation, stores it back out in memory. You can combine those with neuromorphic or analog or what they call in-memory compute and some of these things. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. They're more complicated to work with because those standards haven't been as well developed or defined over all the years like the von Neumann architecture has. So these AI workloads come along in 2015, 2016, 2017, and I think people don't realize how computationally intensive these workloads are. Even on modern GPUs, they're just pushing the limits of the most advanced GPUs. So people who realize this, it revived a whole cast of old ideas from compute, and you had a bunch of entrepreneurs come in the market taking ideas from the 70s and 80s and trying them. So things that, I probably won't explain because they're too technical, but things with names like data flow architectures or analog crossbar arrays or stuff like this. It was new types of computational devices. So the company Neurometric was originally started because we looked at these different hardware, what they call hardware accelerators, because they accelerate AI computations. And we thought, well, companies are going to use different ones of these accelerators for different tasks. And we were going to sort of build a routing layer that would manage that. What we found was that deploying that type of hardware into the same data center was challenging, and people were pretty set on GPUs. But that led us to look at the model space plus the algorithm space that you use to probe the models. So what a lot of people don't know is there's a whole category of algorithms that they call, goes by a couple of names. Some people call it test time scaling, some people call it post-training. But basically it's, how do you ask the model a question? You can use, commonly we use what they call one shot, which is you ask the model a question, it gives you an answer. The problem with that, when you're building important systems, is that these AI models, these large language models, are probability distributions. And so that means if you ask the same question multiple times, you might get different answers because they have different probabilities. And so, in theory, if you ask it a question 100 times and one of the answers has a 60% probability of coming out, you should get that 60 times. So what people realized is you can probe these systems better if you let them think, and there are a series of algorithms that help do this. So one of the more common ones is called best of n, just the letter n. And what best of n says is ask the model the same question 10 times, and then when you look at the outputs, now you start to get a sense of the distribution, and that way you can avoid having the low level, choosing the low level answer, which if you just ask it one time, you might get the low level answer. Your listeners have probably heard of things like chain of thought, which is a very common algorithm we use. So what we realized at Neurometric was, that was really the opportunity, was to help companies when they're moving from a single model to navigate multiple models and multiple algorithms, because both of those vectors are changing in the AI systems infrastructure. And most companies, when you're getting started building a product, you just build on one giant model, typically Anthropic, OpenAI, there's a couple others, maybe Mistral, maybe Llama. But you build all your stuff on this one giant model, and then as it starts running, you realize, well, the big models are awesome in performance, but can be slow and expensive. And you realize not all of your workflow needs to go there. So you may want to pull off certain types of AI workloads and send them to a cheaper, faster model, because you don't need, think about it this way. Think about the smartest human being and you've ever met. And you're like, would you try to run every task through that person? Or no, you wouldn't use them to do some tasks like law. You'd rather use a specialist. Even if you're like, well, my lawyer's not quite as smart as this world's smartest person that I know, they know law a lot better, so I would rather use them, right? And then there are other tasks just like that are a little more common, like basic accounting, basic writing, stuff like that. Like you don't just the way you don't need the most advanced human being, you don't need the most advanced model. And this is why people build teams, and this is why teams have different skill sets, and this is why different levels of performance get paid different amounts. And like models are going to turn out the same way over time. And so we saw this opportunity to help companies along that journey of moving from, hey, we built the product on one model to here's a mix of models with these, test time compute algorithms, because again, the different algorithms that you run have different levels of performance, right? In on the same model. So if I'm using an older model like Llama 3.3 or a smaller model like Quinn 4 billion parameter. So when you hear the term parameter, it's kind of like how many neurons does the model have is a way to think about it. If you run these different algorithms, chain of thought versus best of n versus some of the other ones, you'll get different performance on a given task. And so our software helps you understand as you move from one model to systems of models, which model should you choose for which task? How do you deploy it? What are the estimated cost savings, performance improvements, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a company that is both like there's sort of demand for the product now, but the directions we could take it could be some really novel, innovative stuff. And so it's as an entrepreneur, like it's a lot of fun to work on as a space. If you're building anything internally or externally that requires AI models, one of the things we built as sort of a free tool for the ecosystem is we built a leaderboard that measures and shows a lot of this. And so if you go to leaderboard.neurometric.ai, you can see this leaderboard, you can play around with it. And what it shows is, so we took a data set called CRM Arena. CRM Arena is a CRM data set that was released by Salesforce.com. And we did that because a lot of these models and these companies look at very academic benchmarks that are very theoretical, and like that's not very useful when you take that and then you go try to implement AI models at your company and it all falls apart and they're not good enough and you wonder why. Well, it's because they were on these like fake benchmarks. So we wanted to work on real world data. And then what we did on the leaderboard was we ran these thousands of combinations of models plus these different algorithms I mentioned, like chain of thought and best of n and variations of them all on all these different tasks, so that you can click on a task and we can show you, hey, this is the best model and algorithm combo for that task. You can click on a model, we can show you what it's really good at and what it's not good at. And so if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to apply AI, and maybe this isn't your area of expertise, we can help you navigate that landscape with this free tool that you can look at and start to get a sense for your team of, hey, AI people are really hard to hire. There's just not enough of them in the world. And so even most good companies don't have as many as they need. So do you really want to, like our point of view with the leaderboard was like, companies want to do this and they want to know this, but they can't go hire two people and just be like, test 1,000 model variations for us and see what we should be using. So, but we know, and we've proven with our leaderboard work, that you can get a big lift in performance at a significant cost improvement if you move to these systems of models, right? Put your complex tasks, go to the frontier models like Anthropic and OpenAI, GPT-5, Kimi 2 now is one of them, like all these different models. And then your simpler, more well-defined tasks can go to older models, Llama 3.3, 70B, things like this that can, so that you can parse it out with a system of 4, 5, 6, 7 models, and we can help you design that. And then, and then the way we make money over the long term is, if somebody wants to run some of this on their own data or deploy this in a way where we're constantly sort of checking, what models they should move to now, given that you constantly have new AI workloads from your customers and new things people are trying. Those are the things that we can help with the paid version of the service. So the reason that I chose this space as an entrepreneur was AI inference is just going to be a massive market, because you can think about it as eating into the labor market over time. I don't think it hurts the labor market for quite some time, maybe in a couple of decades, but at least for the next 10 years, this is going to complement human beings largely and is really going to help people be more efficient and better at everything. It raises the bottom. So, if you're not good at something, now you can be at least as competent as the AI model is, which is helpful. And I just felt like this would really be a very large market to play in, and we could do a lot of stuff to uh, help people figure out their system dynamics. And it's as a technical person with technical background, but also as an entrepreneur, it's fun to both push the limits of sort of business and technology. So, like a lot of entrepreneurs who do a lot of startups, we have learned a lot since starting the company. And as you can imagine, we have learned that some of our initial assumptions are wrong. So, one of the first ones of those assumptions that was incorrect was we thought, yeah, I'm a technologist, so I want to touch all the dials and knobs. I have an Android phone. I don't like iPhones because I want to be able to play with it and everything else. So we started designing the tool that like, hey, we'll take your data sets and we'll test it on all these models so you know what's best, and we'll give you all the dials to test it yourself or whatever. And all we heard from people was, can you just do it for me? Can you just make it super easy? Like I'd rather not think, like, tell me what I should use, and then that's all I need to know. So so we had to change it. So the model now is you drop in one line of code, and this is like whatever line you would use to call your models. Say you're calling OpenAI. The way it works is you drop this in, we keep calling OpenAI, and we keep routing your traffic through there, but we filter off some of your traffic and we run it against this. Think of it like a performance harness that we've built. And the performance harness runs your workloads against lots of different stuff and comes back and says, well, you could save money over here. You could actually get better performance over here, maybe more accurate model and all this kind of stuff. And then we don't automatically make the model switch for you yet, because we still want to give users the chance to say, there may be things we're not thinking about, that might cause you not to want to switch. But we want to give people the ability to be informed and then say, yes, I'd like to switch this one over for performance reasons. Sometimes latency reasons, like it just needs to be faster. If you have, particularly when you're doing these agentic workflows where you're chaining a lot of steps together, if all the steps get too long, now your agentic workflow is really long, and that's not very good. So that was a big mistake that we made that we have since corrected from talking to customers. And then we're getting better at figuring out the use cases as well. Because if you have low volume, wide variability AI use cases, you really need to stay on the frontier models, because they're the ones that can take lots of different tasks. And the same way that, in that, going back to my human analogy, you would hire a generalist who was really smart and had done a lot of things, who could triage every kind of thing. But in every company, you typically do start to have over time a series of well-defined tasks that you can offload to a certain team or a certain person. And that's kind of what we're doing with the models. And so, as an example, we have a company that builds knowledge graphs out of documents. And one of the things that they will do is they could send all those documents to the largest model. It's really expensive. It's way too slow. They're trying to extract certain things, certain relationships to put into the graph. Well, if you can use a small model that just needs to extract that one relationship, and it runs faster and faster and faster, that's beneficial to them, right? They save money, and their tool moves faster, which means they can process more documents. And so it's really weird that normally when you're working in these spaces, you have to make trade-offs. And you always hear about like software design, like you can get it, fast, cheap, or high quality, pick two, but you can't get all three. What you get when you move from a single model, AI model, to a system of several models is you typically get better performance, like more accuracy, faster performance, and it saves you money. And you can do that because you can use the best model for the task at hand, and we help you determine what that model is. And so it's been more popular than I expected with early customer base. A lot of people ask, having started several companies, what are the lessons I've learned? What do I do differently? A lot of VCs ask you, what are you doing differently at this company than previous ones? And I think there's two things. One is, the thing that I learned at my first company that's so valuable being a CEO is you have to have really difficult conversations with lots of people about their performance. Customers leave, investors are upset, like just bad stuff always happens. It's part of the game. And my communication skills over my years as a first-time CEO dramatically improved. And so one of the things that I do now at all my companies is I actually put together a communications course. It's one of our corporate values is like being very significant and important and serious about your communications. And that translates into very practical terms. So an example of a very practical example use case is if there's a piece of knowledge that everyone needs to see, it has to go in email, not Slack. Because Slack, if you're, there's all these channels and stuff's going on. If you miss a couple days of work for some reason, you come back, you might not catch up and you might not read it. And then somebody goes, "Oh, I didn't know that we had to do the thing because I was gone and I didn't want to read 2,000 Slack messages when I came back." So those things have to go in email. So we think about communication on that level. But then I teach this communications course that everyone is required to take once a year that talks about how do you have difficult conversations at work, how do you handle conflict in positive ways, because a lot of good product management is about productive conflict, discussing and debating the right way to go. And you need to do that in a way where people learn not to take it personally, where people have good skills that you've given them for how to say, it's very simple. And like, you don't say, "Well, that's a stupid idea." You say, "That's interesting, but I see it this way." And we have a whole course on that, and that really drives a lot of our culture, because when people have to go through that course, they know what is expected of them in terms of how they communicate with their coworkers, the fact that they're supposed to speak up, if they see a problem and all that kind of stuff. And then one of the other ways that it changed into a different company, at least for this sort of fifth startup, is I brought on three other co-founders. I've never started a company with more than one other co-founder, but I did it because if you look at where I want to take this over the long run, I think the technology pieces that we're touching on are some of the most important pieces in what I would call the AI inference technology stack. And so if you're technical, the way to think about it is we sit above the platforms that serve and host models. So we sit above Amazon Web Services or Together AI or those groups, but we sit below the agent builders. So, these companies that are building agent workflows and all that would use us to manage and call different models. And we are like the brain that understands which models are appropriate for which tasks, what things are good at. So, going back to the human analogy, I'm the person in the company, or Neurometric is the person in the company that you come to and say, "I need to get this thing done. Who should I talk to?" And we say, "Talk to this person." So over time, this could touch on so many different areas of just the directions it could go are very endless. And so I wanted some co-founders who I knew they've all been CEOs, they've all started companies. So there's four of us that we've built 10 or 11 companies between us. And I knew these co-founders would be like really great people to be able to take and run with concepts with, as you guys know, as your listeners know who are entrepreneurs, it's like you learn at least enough of all the business to know how to go get things done, even though you're not an expert in things and everything. And so what this will allow us to do over the next couple of years is take this company in some really interesting directions. So a lot of the work that we're doing, when you think about figuring out how to break apart the tasks that go to a large, complex frontier model and use them on different models, well, one of the trends that's coming is edge AI. And the problem with edge, with robotics and automotive and all these other consumer devices you're going to have is these have small, power sensitive processors in them that can't run these big models. I see a world where we can help be the system that figures out like what model you should run on your very small microcontroller that runs in your digital camera or whatever that does AI processing. So that's an interesting direction for the company. The other thing that I think not a lot of people realize is there's more types of models coming out all the time. So most of the LLMs that we use are based on a technology structure that is called a transformer model, and it works a certain way. But there are other things that are coming up. A common one is called the diffusion model. It works differently. There's some called state space models. So, you don't need to know all these terms, but you need to understand that there are a bunch of new technologies that are coming that are going to create new types of models that have new capabilities. It's just going to get harder to manage. And one of the analogies that I use is when social media first came out, there were a lot of people that had this idea of like, "Oh, this is just going to crush all the old ways of marketing." But it didn't. All it meant was it was another thing that you had to do now. It was another channel. I mean, people still use direct mail. People still use email marketing, still very popular. Like all the old ways are popular and the new ways now too. So this is how it's going to go with these models. There's just going to be a lot to manage. And the companies that are the most successful long term in the AI space are going to be the ones that understand how to manage these systems of models, not, toss everything to just one big model where you end up, overpaying and it's overkill for a lot of things. I mean, um, and so for Neurometric, I think there is one of the things I wanted as an entrepreneur was something where I could see a very long growth path. And so I think supporting these new models, supporting new platforms, supporting edge AI over time just helps our value grow and grow inside of the companies where, we become a key piece of their infrastructure that is sort of like the orchestration component of their AI brain for the infrastructure that they build. To give you some other examples from the communication courses that we teach, we tell people how to get out of bad situations sometimes where, because a lot of the time you spend, particularly as your company gets larger, you spend a lot of time with people in your office complaining about something somebody else said. And so sometimes that happens because the way that children don't always have the words and know what to say about certain things. Well, when you're new to the workforce, right, you're coming out of college and you're young and you haven't been in the workforce and you don't know how the politics work and how people do certain things. So in this course, we can give people the skills for like recognizing when somebody's saying certain things to you and how to respond, when somebody's being very negative, when you have to be negative. Like sometimes you have to tell people like, this isn't good, like the work you're doing is not good. And so we spend a lot of time giving people like specific sentences they can use, setting the expectations around the company. So like I always tell people as part of this course, I'm giving you a bunch of slides here that tell you the kinds of things to say. My expectation is that you say them before you come in my office. So like we have a whole section there on sexual harassment, right? Because it's a tricky topic in companies because a lot of people do meet at work. That's where they start dating. And so like, what are your lines there of like, is it sexual harassment to ask somebody on a date? Probably not. Is it sexual harassment to ask somebody repeatedly on a date after they say no? Probably so. So what I would tell people is, extrapolating through situations like that is, well, the first time something happens, you should have the toolkit to take care of it and address it. If that doesn't stop it, come talk to me. But don't come talk to me and somebody said something to you one time that you thought was a little bit offensive. My first question is going to be, did you address it with them? And if you say no, then I'm going to say, well, you need to go back and do that before you come have me intervene. It also saves you a lot of time as a manager. And actually, it builds a better culture when people feel like they have the right to talk to other people and solve these issues on their own. One of the other things that's really interesting about starting this company compared to my previous company is AI has killed a lot of the previous ways that you would do marketing, or I shouldn't say killed them, but has made them less effective because they're easier for everybody to do. So they're more competitive. And so we've tried to get around that by building more community and creating a lot more distinguished content, the content that would be kind of hard for AI to put out because AI doesn't have some of this knowledge yet. So if you're working on AI and you're interested in, what Neurometric does and you want to be helpful, obviously check out the leaderboard. That can be really helpful. You can poke around and you can get a feel for some of the things our tool can do, and that's all free. We have a guide, an ebook on the website that helps you understand the frameworks that you should use moving from one giant model to multiple models. Like, what are the questions you need to ask? What are the things that you need to think about? And then sometimes we do these ad hoc sort of office hour times where you can just meet with our team and ask questions. You don't have to be a customer or anything else. We're just, one of my personal values is helpfulness. I think that comes from the fact that, I've had a lot of people help me through my career that helped me get to the next level, educate me on things I didn't understand. And I think when you've been a successful entrepreneur, you should give some of that back to other entrepreneurs. And so helpfulness is a core company value for us, where I tell people all the time, like, we should be part of the community. We should contribute to open source. We should do all these things. to the extent that we can, some percentage of our time and effort. And and so we do this sometimes where like people just have questions. We host office hours and we answer questions about AI inference and model configuration and all this kind of stuff. So if you want to learn more, if you think Neurometric might be useful to you, please go to the website, neurometric.ai. You can always email me, rob@neurometric.ai. I'm pretty responsive when I can be. And if you're a fellow entrepreneur and you want to trade stories or anything like that, I'd be happy to connect on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. Thanks for having me on today.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
Imagine a space where triumphs, trials, and tales of entrepreneurship come alive. Welcome to the 21st Century Entrepreneurship Podcast, a gold awarded journey hosted by Martin Piskarik, connecting with listeners in 95 countries and ranking in the top 0.5% of all podcasts. Join our exclusive community, elevate your perspective, and embark on the path to success.